In the Democratic primary, third quarter fundraising is now done, and we've got the results for some candidates. The most information so far has been released by Bernie Sanders, and as you dig into it, you will learn a lot. What you won't find in there is financial evidence that his campaign is dead. You've seen a lot of op-eds over the past few days asserting that. But let's take a look at what we know from both Bernie Sanders and some of the other candidates. And by the way, and most fun, the hypocrisy from certain analysts before and after Bernie Sanders revealed his fundraising total. So overall, Bernie Sanders raised more than $25 million over the past 3 months. That is up $7 million from what he raised in the second quarter, so a significant amount of money. Again, this is small dollar donors almost universally. In fact, I looked it up and the average contribution was $18.01, I think. So even less than the $27 of his 2016 run. These are small donations. And we've got a little bit more information. He said, by the way, that September has been his strongest fundraising month to date. So that's a 3-month period. Apparently it was highest in September. We also have a little bit of information about the sorts of people that are donating. I'm hoping that other candidates will release this too, but at least we do know it for Bernie Sanders. Individuals who listed their occupation as teacher were the most frequent donors to Sanders. And the 3 most common employers were Starbucks, Amazon, and Walmart, which I just love that. I mean, look, we have to admit that obviously there are a lot of people who work for those, so it's a little bit easier for them to be at the top of the list. But these are some of the corporations that he has most specifically and individually fought for the rights of the workers, being involved in strikes against Amazon and Walmart, pushing for the implementation of both benefits but also raised minimum wage. And apparently the workers at those companies have been paying attention to it. So we have a little bit of information early on from some of the other candidates. Before we get to that though, this $25 million haul, how important is it? What can we actually learn from it? I mean, after all, in the past few months, Elizabeth Warren has moved up above Bernie Sanders, both in national polls and in some, but not all, of the state polls. So how important is raising money? Well, Nate Silver, he's the numbers guy. He said in response to this, the single most favorable indicator for Democrats in terms of their chance of taking over the House is fundraising. Specifically, individual contributions to individual candidates, which tends to be the most important predictive measure of electoral success. So obviously good news for Bernie Sanders. Oh wait, no, that's what Nate Silver said back in August of last year. After the Bernie Sanders numbers came out, slightly modulated message. Here he said, my general view on fundraising numbers, a bad number can be legitimately bad news since it can jeopardize the sustainability of the campaign, but a good number isn't necessarily great news. Polls, among other metrics, are considerably more predictive of future success. So August 10, individual contributions tend to be the most important predictive measures of electoral success. Today, polls are considerably more predictive of future success. You have before and you have after. You have money good, you have money don't matter. You have polls, not as important as money, and now money, come on, polls. And the only thing that appears to have changed is Bernie Sanders raised a lot of money. So look, Nate Silver, I have a lot of respect for him in the numbers area. But what he does with those numbers is seemingly nonsensical, but nonsensical in a consistent direction. It tends to be very focused on what Bernie Sanders is doing well or poorly in. Let's move Nate Silver to the side. We only have a little bit of information about the other candidates because it is just the first day, and especially with Bernie Sanders coming out saying he raised 25 million, if you didn't raise as much money, you're not as hyped about putting that out there, but some have. So Pete Buttigieg said that he raised more than $19.1 million during the last 3 months. Now that is a decline from the 24.8 that he raised in the second quarter, where he actually raised significantly more than Bernie Sanders. That has dropped, but I mean, nobody looks at $19 million raised in 3 months and says, man, that guy's broke. That is a ton of money. It's especially a ton of money considering that he's never really done all that well in the polls. I mean, I'm not even sure at this point if he's in the top 6. I assume he's still in the top 6, but he generally is pulling in a couple of percentage points, maybe a bit more in some of the state level polls. To raise that much money and to not seemingly have much of a base, much of an actual support out there amongst the people, that is an interesting disconnect. A little bit less disconnected than it was in the second quarter where he raised a mind-boggling sum while being at 2% in the polls. But this is what can sustain you potentially if you're not doing particularly well. But remember, in terms of getting in the debates, he's going to need to raise his numbers, not for this poll, not for this round of debates, but the one that's coming after, assuming that they do jack up the percentage you need to have gotten in a number of polls. I don't believe that he's one of the few that actually meets that. So he's gonna need to take that $19 million and, like Tom Steyer, turn it into polling numbers. We don't have overall numbers on other candidates, but we do have a little bit of information from the past couple of days. Andrew Yang yesterday was saying that he had raised about $1.5 million. I believe that was in a 2-day period. I think that he was pushing to raise $2 million before the deadline. This was with a few hours to go. It's possible that he reached that. So look, Andrew Yang, who I believe has been polling higher than Pete Buttigieg, he is raising a lot of money. He's been pretty consistently good at that. Not to the level that Buttigieg is, but raising a significant amount of money as well. I don't know what the overall numbers are. For the others, no idea. It is entirely possible that Joe Biden will still have raised more money than Bernie Sanders. I remember, I think it was for Q2. Bernie put out a number, it was very high, and I believe Biden had beaten him. I mean, that's a different sort of fundraising in some fairly fundamental ways, but it's a lot of money nonetheless. We talked a little bit about who was doing the contributions. Let's bring up what is gonna look like an impossibly complicated chart to break down. But it's gonna give you, for the individual candidates, to the extent that you can see the circles surrounding their names, you have the breakdown of the sorts of people that are giving money to them. And look, to really get much out of this, you're gonna have to pause it and look at it later. But there are, the reason I show this is there are significant differences in who tends to give money. I mean, you see there immediately, for Elizabeth Warren, for instance, professors definitely like giving money to her. Perhaps not surprising for someone who comes from academia, scientists as well. Man, they've even broken it down to the level of editors. But you see there that, for instance, for Joe Biden, you have attorneys, also homemakers and investors. I don't know how surprising those are gonna be. For Bernie Sanders, you've got a lot of teachers, we pointed it out, that's been consistent, but also engineers, so potentially doing well amongst like high-tech workers and that sort of thing. I mean, not necessarily amongst their CEOs. Mark Zuckerberg just came out specifically against Elizabeth Warren. That was revealed earlier today. I have a feeling he probably doesn't like Bernie Sanders any more than he likes Elizabeth Warren. But just learn a little bit about who they tend to be appealing to and how that might be translated into their strategy going forward, because we're on the cusp of an important change here. We've been riding just national polls. You do your debates, you try to raise your overall numbers. That is rapidly coming to an end, because in just a few months, we're not going to be talking about sort of overall numbers, these sort of vague things. We're gonna be talking about competing in individual states. And if you look at the individual states, if you look at Iowa and New Hampshire and South Carolina and Nevada, you can see that some candidates are doing substantially better or worse than they are in the national numbers. And the money is going to be more important, because now we get down to not just some sort of overall effort to raise name recognition, but figuring out, where am I going to spend my money? How am I going to spend my money? Am I gonna be hiring staff in Iowa? Or do I think that I don't have a chance in Iowa, so I'm already diverting my attention to South Carolina or New Hampshire? Elizabeth Warren, we're getting some early indication her strategy is going to be go hard in Iowa, attempt to win there, and then ride momentum through the next few states. Joe Biden appears, if you look at his spending, to have sort of decided that Iowa and New Hampshire are not going to be huge winners for him. He'll do okay, but he doesn't expect that he's gonna win there, and instead he's sort of retreating in terms of spending to South Carolina. You need to know all of this once the actual results start coming in, to see how are people doing, not in just an absolute sense, but in comparison to their strategy, how they thought they would do. And all of them are starting to figure that out now. And so how they spend that money, these huge millions of dollars that they're raising, that is gonna be incredibly important. We're getting past the point where you just need to know who these people are. We need to see how they're gonna influence voters in individual states to try to set the narrative going into something like Super Tuesday that might well make or break the entire thing for individual candidates. Thank you for watching this clip from the Damage Report. For more content from the show and access to TYT Network members only exclusives, go to tyt.com/Brooke. Wait, no, it's tyt.com/John. Go to tyt.com/John to sign up.